This is the homework helper for Chapter 7, Section 5, Coordinate Geometry. So let's begin with question number 1. As you can see, the directions for 1 and 2 are identical. We are to graph the polygons with the given vertices and give the most specific name for that polygon. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and lay down on the graph the different vertices they've given us. Notice in this first one, it's got 3 vertices, or 3 corners in essence, that are going to be formed here. So we have S at -3, -3, which should be hard to screw up. -3 on the x-axis means I'm going to go 3 left from the origin, which you remember is the center point. And then -3 also on the y-axis, 3 down from the center point. And again, you just pull your fingers together to where those meet, and that's your first vertex, point S. Why S? Because they told us it was S right there. Point T is at -3, 4, so that -3 repeats, but this time I'm going to go all the way up to 4 on the y-axis, and again, pull my finger together to where those meet, and that's going to be point T. And then finally for point U, we've got 4, -3. So 4, -3 is a little bit different in regards to the first number. This time on the x-axis, we're going to go over to 4, which is off to the right from the origin. But then -3 repeats, which we already saw, that was down 3. And if I pull my fingers together to where those would come together, that's going to be over here in quadrant 4. That's point U. And it should have been fairly obvious when I said it had 3 corners. Well, there's only one shape that has 3 corners. It doesn't really matter how it's drawn. If it has 3 corners, it's going to be a triangle. And you can see that this particular triangle is actually a very pretty right triangle, where the right angle is where S is, down here in this lower left corner of the shape. So the most specific name for the polygon is triangle. We could go more specific way beyond that and even say right triangle. What they wouldn't want you to do is here, if it was, for instance, a 4-sided shape, they wouldn't want you to just say quadrilateral. They would want you to say square or parallelogram or rhombus or whatever that shape might end up being. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at 3 and 4. You're going to approach 3 and 4 in the same way. I'm going to take a look at question number 3. It says that triangle WOV has a right angle at W, and WU equals 5. Okay, so we know that where this is here, the W is going to end up forming a right angle. Now, since they're telling us that WU equals 5, and distance is always positive, you really have a choice here, which leads to two potentially different answers. Rather, we know it's got to be a triangle, so it's either going to go 5 up or 5 down. And when I say it's got to be a triangle, it's also got to be a right triangle. So we've got to be forming that right angle here somehow. Otherwise, we won't be getting that in. And again, that directions told me so right there, that it's got to be right. So I'm going to shoot 5 either north from W or south from W. It really doesn't matter because the distance would be 5. I'm just going to go up because that just seems kind of traditional. And connect in my points here, and there is your triangle with a right angle at W. Okay, let's go ahead and go down to 5 and 6 then. And in 5 and 6, it's asking you to find the coordinates of the midpoint of the segment, and you'll use the same approaches here for 7, 8, and 9. Now, if you want to take a look at your textbook for some help here, page 355 in your textbook at the top has some great directions, a good sample problem on how to find the coordinates of a midpoint there. What they tell you to do is to average the x values and the y values, and that will give you the midpoint. Kind of think of the concept of the median for a minute. If we have 2 numbers in the middle, how do I find the median? Well, remember, we add them up and divide by 2. It's kind of the same idea here, except you've got 2 x coordinates kind of on either side, and then 2 y coordinates on either side. You're going to treat each one separately, but using that same idea of median when there's 2 numbers in the middle. Sometimes it helps just to see it kind of visually if you lay this down on paper. So here you see graphs of 5 and 6, which should help you kind of get an idea of where that midpoint might be. For instance, we see in 5 that the midpoint should be somewhere right around there where I drew the x, somewhere in between 2 and 3 for the x, and between 3 and 4 for the y. Looking at question 6, we see that the midpoint should be right around there, somewhere between -2 and -3 on the x, and around 5 on the y. If we draw these really neatly and do some really nice counting, we can probably do it that way, but the formula is probably easier than spending time drawing the graphs and then trying to sketch these out, especially if they don't go through major grid boxes. If the answer was something like for a coordinate with a half or a third or a fourth, something like 2.25 comma 0.25, that might actually be difficult to see. But that does help us get an idea of where the answer should be around. So we'll go back to the questions here. And again, what we want to do is average the x values and average the y values. And that will be our coordinate here. So what we want to do for this first one here in question 5 is we're going to average the 1 and the 4, which are the x's. Remember, the x's are always the first number. 5 divided by 2, which is going to be 2.5. And then I'm going to average the y values here, which are 2 and 5. And that's going to be 7 divided by 2, which is 3.5. And that's a good instance of what we were just talking about. It might be hard visually to get that 2.5, 3.5 idea. But remember, when we did the graph here, we did say that the answer looked like it was around 2 to 3 in that ballpark. And indeed, we did actually put our x between 2 and 3 when we did that on 2.5, which was the actual answer. And the same is true actually for the 3.5 here. If we read to the left from our x, it does match up with 3.5. All right, let's apply that formula one more time. You'll use that same formula to help you answer 7, 8, and 9. Again, start off, add the x values here in number 6, which are -8 and 2. That's going to add up to -6, and then I'm going to divide by 2, which is -3. And then for the y values, I'm going to add 6 and 4, which is 10, and then divide by 2, which is 5. -3 comma 5. And quickly, if we go back to the illustration, we weren't really too far off. Notice the x, we had placed it just to the right of -3, but it's almost dead on with the 5 here when we read to the right. So indeed, our estimate from the illustration, not a bad piece of information when we computed the actual answer.